My parents decided to side with my ex-husband and cut me off from him, but then years later they wanted reconciliation. When I said no, they showed up at my stepdaughter's school. My parents have been a huge source of turmoil in my life. They sided with my ex-husband and cut me off for years, but out of nowhere, they tried to reconnect with me. When I turned them down, they showed up at my stepdaughter's school. I'm feeling a little conflicted about this, and I really hope some of you can help me figure out how to handle it. So, here's the situation. I'm 32, and I've been dealing with my parents, who are both in their 60s. They want to reconnect, but honestly, it's complicated, and I'm struggling to figure out how to approach this whole mess. To give you some background, let me tell you a bit about my relationship with them. Growing up, my parents were always incredibly hard on me. No matter what I did, it was never enough. If I got an A, they'd question why it wasn't an A+. If I picked a hobby, they'd criticize it for not being practical enough. Their behavior wasn't outright abusive, but they always found ways to make me feel like I was failing. When it came to big decisions, they'd act as if I was incapable of thinking for myself. They'd meddle in everything, and that's where things really went downhill. Things came to a head when I was 23. I married my ex-husband, Jake. Jake and I had been high school sweethearts, and we thought it made sense to marry once we were done with college and things settled down. For the first time in my life, my parents seemed to approve of my choice in a partner. Looking back, I now realize they probably liked him because he came from a wealthy family and appeared well put together. But things took a drastic turn for the worse once I got married. As soon as we said I do, it was like a switch flipped in Jake. He turned into someone completely different, a horrible person. He became manipulative, controlling, and extremely critical. He isolated me from my friends and had a temper that was quick to flare. It got so bad that I was walking on eggshells every day. I know some of you will wonder why I didn't leave him as soon as his behavior started to change, but it wasn't that simple. I didn't really know what a healthy relationship was supposed to look like. I was so young and naive, and I convinced myself I was in love with him. I thought he was just going through a tough time, and that his struggles with his emotions were causing him to lash out at me. I know it sounds ridiculous now, but I truly believe that all I had to do was be there for him. But after years of tolerating his toxic behavior, I eventually realized I couldn't stay. No amount of talking or fighting was going to change how he treated me. It took a long time for me to save up enough money to leave, but when I was finally ready to escape, I went to my parents for help. I'd always been honest with them about what Jake was like, even months before I planned to leave. I thought they would support me. But in hindsight, I should have known better. Every time I opened up about what Jake said or did, my parents found ways to make me feel guilty instead of comforting or supporting me. So, when I turned to them for help, they got angry with me. They said I was being immature for wanting to throw my marriage away and that I should just stick it out because getting a divorce was shameful. The worst thing they did during this time was telling Jake where I was staying. My plan was to stay with him for 2 weeks while I talked to Jake about getting a divorce. I knew Jake would freak out and possibly hurt me if I stayed with him, so I figured my parents would be a safe place to stay. I didn't want Jake to know where I was, but if he found out, I thought at least my parents would be there to protect me. But after only 3 days of staying with them, they ended up calling Jake to let him know where I was. When I found out that my parents had called Jake to tell him where I was staying, I was furious. They told him he could come over whenever he wanted to talk to me. They thought they were helping me reconcile, but they had no idea how dangerous that was. Thankfully, Jake didn't do anything beyond crying and begging me to come back. But after that, I knew I couldn't rely on my parents for anything. I left their house and stayed with a friend instead. I didn't speak to them much after that, but up until then, they still called regularly to check in on me, always telling me how wrong I was for wanting to go through with the divorce. It took some time, but once the divorce was finalized, I never heard from them again. Not a single call, text, or a holiday card. It was like I didn't exist. At first, it hurt so much. I cried for months, devastated by the fact that my own parents had abandoned me when I needed them most. But eventually, I realized I couldn't keep dwelling on it. I had bigger things to focus on. I had to rebuild my life. The next few years were tough, but they were also life-changing. I moved to a new city and started therapy, which helped me heal from both Jake's abuse and my parents' abandonment. I poured myself into my career in graphic design, something I'd always been passionate about, and slowly but surely, things started to improve. About 2 years ago, I met Eric, 36M, who is now my husband. He's kind, supportive, and everything Jake wasn't. Eric has a 10-year-old daughter, Sophie, from a previous relationship, and together we've created this beautiful little family. We got married just a few months ago, and for the first time in a long time, life feels stable and happy. Now, on to the situation that brought me here. About a month ago, a local filmmaker released a documentary about financial and emotional abuse. One of the key case studies in the film was about Jake. I hadn't kept up with his life after our divorce, so I had no idea what he had been up to. When I saw the documentary, I was horrified. The film revealed how Jake had manipulated several women financially and emotionally, engaged in shady business deals, and even swindled people out of thousands of dollars. I always knew Jake was a horrible person, but I never imagined his behavior would escalate to that level. The filmmaker didn't use his real name, but the details were so specific that anyone who knew him would recognize it. After the documentary aired, my phone started blowing up. Old friends and acquaintances reached out to me, saying things like, "Wow, you really dodged a bullet, and I can't believe you went through that." That's how I found out about the documentary in the first place. While part of me felt relief knowing that Jake's true nature was finally exposed, the real shock came when my parents reached out. The first message I got was from my mom. She sent me a long, emotional text apologizing for not believing me all those years ago. She also asked for a chance to make things right. Then came the voicemails from my dad, telling me how sorry he and my mom were for the way they treated me, and how they wanted to reconnect. They said a lot of things, but the gist of it was that they deeply regretted their actions and were desperate to make amends. I don't even know what to feel about all of this. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't affected by their messages. After all, they're my parents. Of course, a part of me wants to have them back in my life. But I can't forget how they treated me when I was at my lowest. I can't erase the memory of how they put me in danger just to satisfy their own beliefs. I haven't responded to any of their attempts to reach out. I can't bring myself to. Instead, I sit there with my phone in my hand, rereading their messages over and over again, feeling a whirlwind of emotions that I can't quite make sense of. Part of me feels justified in ignoring them. They abandoned me when I needed them most, and now they're only reaching out because they're ashamed of how wrong they were. Another part of me feels like maybe I should give them a chance. After all, people can change, right? I've been losing sleep over this decision. Eric thinks I shouldn't feel guilty about cutting them off, but it's not that simple for me. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust them again, but I also feel like completely ignoring them might be too harsh. I've come so far since those dark days, and I don't want them dragging me back into old wounds. But at the same time, I wonder if I'd regret not hearing them out. So, am I wrong for not wanting my parents in my life after everything they did? Or am I just being stubborn, holding on to the past? Update 1. Hi again, everyone. Thanks so much for all the comments on my original post. Your perspectives really helped me think things through. Some of you asked questions I didn't address, so I wanted to clarify a few things before diving into what's happened since then. First, a lot of you asked why I even considered responding to my parents in the first place. Honestly, it's complicated. I've spent years trying to heal from the abandonment and betrayal, but deep down, there's still this part of me that wants to believe they could change. I guess I was also scared that if I ignored them completely, I might regret it later. Another question that came up was about Jake and whether my parents knew how bad he was during the marriage. I told them bits and pieces back then, but they never took me seriously. They just assumed I was exaggerating or being dramatic. I only shared the full details of Jake's behavior with them a few weeks before I planned to run away. They didn't take me seriously then, either, but I wasn't in the right state of mind to fully process everything at that point. I just assumed that because they were my parents, they'd protect me, whether they believed me or not. I was wrong, obviously. After reading your advice, I realized I couldn't avoid this situation forever. I figured the only way I'd get any peace was to hear my parents out. So I reached out and agreed to meet them at a neutral spot, a small cafe halfway between their town and mine. I thought they'd be genuinely sorry for how they treated me, and that we could have an honest conversation. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. When I met them, They seemed more interested in justifying their behavior than actually apologizing. My mom went on and on about how they didn't know Jake was that bad and how the documentary opened their eyes. My dad said they did what they thought was right at the time, acting like that should somehow excuse everything. It felt like they were more sorry about being wrong than about the pain they caused me. At one point, my mom even hinted that maybe I could have handled things differently, and perhaps they wouldn't have misunderstood the situation. That hurt a lot. After everything I went through, they still found a way to blame me, even just a little. It was in that moment that I realized they weren't truly trying to make amends. They were just trying to make themselves feel better. I told them I didn't want to continue the conversation. I said I was happy with my life as it was, and that I wanted things to go back to how they were before they reached out, us living separate lives. They looked shocked and tried to argue, but I left before they could talk me into staying. It wasn't an easy decision, but I felt like it was the right one for me and my family. That should have been the end of it, but then they crossed a line I couldn't ignore. Last weekend, Sophie had school play. It was something she had been looking forward to for weeks, and Eric and I were so proud of how hard she worked on her part. So you can imagine my surprise when I saw my parents sitting in the audience. I never told them about the play, so they must have gotten the details from Eric's Facebook. Don't worry, we've updated our privacy settings now. But it wasn't just that they showed up, it was how they acted. They introduced themselves to other parents as Sophie's grandparents. Sophie was confused and asked Eric who they were. It was such an uncomfortable moment. I had to pull my parents aside and tell them to leave. My mom started crying and said I was punishing them for their past mistakes. My dad said they were just trying to be there for me now, as if that somehow justified them ignoring my boundaries. I didn't want to make a scene, especially with other parents and kids around. It was tough, but I asked them to leave as calmly as I could. They didn't make it easy, though. They kept trying to cause a scene, but somehow I managed to get them to calm down and leave. After they left, Eric and I were both furious. He's been incredibly supportive through all of this, but now he feels like my parents are trying to force their way into our lives in the worst possible way. He was already upset and mad at them for mistreating me in the first place, and then for still refusing to take accountability for their actions. He's also protective of Sophie, and he's worried about how their behavior might confuse or upset her. He's especially concerned that they're going to take things too far and might even try using Sophie to get to me. I completely understand where he's coming from, so I sent my parents a firm text afterward, telling them their actions were unacceptable and that I needed space. I told them that if they continued to cross boundaries, I'd have no choice but to cut off contact completely. They haven't responded yet, but I'm sure it's only a matter of time. Part of me wonders if I'm being too harsh, but I also feel like I have every right to protect my family from this kind of chaos. I gave them a chance, and they proved they weren't ready to respect my boundaries or my life. Anyway, I'll keep you all updated on what happens next. Thanks for reading, and I appreciate any advice you have moving forward. Update 2. I really didn't think I'd be back so soon, but here we are. Things have completely gone off the rails, and I'm at a loss. A couple of days ago, a family friend reached out to me. This person is someone I've stayed in touch with over the years, but who also keeps in contact with my parents. They called to let me know something they thought I should hear. My parents had apparently tried to contact Jake. Yes, my abusive, controlling, manipulative ex-husband. They tried to contact the same guy whose crimes and predatory behavior were featured in a documentary just a few months ago. According to my friend, my parents reached out to Jake to hear his side of the story about our divorce. I was stunned. After all the apologizing they did, after claiming they believe me now and wanted to make things right, they still felt the need to validate everything by going directly to him. What makes things worse is that, apparently, Jake didn't respond to them directly, but made some smug, backhanded remarks through mutual acquaintances about how I've always been difficult and quick to blame others. Hearing this felt like someone ripping open an old wound. I didn't want to believe it at first. I thought maybe my friend had misunderstood or had gotten bad information. I tried to give my parents the benefit of the doubt again and reached out to them to confirm. I called my mom and asked her if she and my dad had contacted Jake. She didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she started defending their decision. She said they wanted to understand the full picture of what happened in my marriage. She even said something like, "We were wrong before, so we don't want to make that mistake again." I was floored. I was already upset that they'd broken several boundaries while trying to make up to me, but finding out that my parents still didn't trust anything that happened to me, even with video evidence of Jake's behavior, made me feel like I really didn't matter at all to them. My dad chimed in during the call and doubled down. He said that Jake's behavior in the documentary was concerning, but that it didn't necessarily mean he had been a bad husband. They also insinuated that I might have been exaggerating my struggles back then, and that they just wanted clarity. Their complete lack of remorse was like a slap in the face. I asked them if they had any idea how much pain this caused me and how much courage it took for me to even leave Jake in the first place. My mom brushed it off and said I was being too emotional and that they didn't mean to hurt me in any way. My dad claimed that they were just trying to make informed decisions about rebuilding their relationship with me. At that point, I lost it. I told them they were selfish, manipulative, and incapable of change. I said they had no place in my life or my family if they couldn't respect me and my boundaries. They couldn't even acknowledge how deeply hurtful their actions were. They didn't even apologize. My mom just sighed like I was being difficult, and my dad muttered something about how they can't ever win with me. I hung up on them after that, feeling so overwhelmed with emotions. I was sad and angry at the way my parents were treating me, especially after all those years of no communication. I can't believe I gave them another chance just for them to betray me all over again. But I was also relieved. I was actually glad that I wouldn't have to interact with them anymore. As horrible as it was, this actually did bring me some closure. I always worried about how my parents and I stopped communicating on bad terms, and somewhere deep inside, I always blamed myself for that. But now I can clearly see that I wasn't at fault at all. I talked to Eric about it, and he's been my rock through all of this. He was furious too, especially since my parents' actions directly impacted the stability of our family. Sophie doesn't deserve to be dragged into this, and neither does Eric. We both agreed that I needed to protect our family from my parents' chaos, so I blocked them on everything: phone, email, social media. I also told the family friend who had warned me what happened, and they were completely supportive of my decision to cut contact. They even apologized for being the one to break the news, but honestly, I'm grateful they did. I needed to know. I will admit that it hurts to realize that my parents will likely never be the people I need them to be, but I also know I can't keep putting myself in situations where I'm hurt over and over again. My focus is on my family, Eric, Sophie, and the life we've built together. They're my real family, and I won't let anyone ruin that. Thanks again for all your advice and support. It's been a tough road, but I'm learning to stand up for myself and prioritize the people who truly matter. Update 3. Hi again. This will hopefully be my last update. After everything that's happened, I've decided it's time to put a final stop to my parents' interference in my life. Things escalated in a way I never imagined, and I've had to make some tough decisions for the sake of my family. A couple of weeks ago, I got a call from Sophie's school. The principal wanted to let me know about an odd situation involving my parents. Apparently, they had reached out to the school directly and claimed that they were Sophie's grandparents. They apparently wanted to volunteer for an upcoming school event. They said it was their way of bonding with their granddaughter and insisted they had my permission. Thankfully, the school was suspicious enough to contact me first instead of just accepting their offer. I was horrified. I had been pretty clear when I told them that I wanted nothing to do with them, but the fact that they chose to ignore everything I had to say and go straight for my family made me see red. They knew that I did not appreciate the fact that they showed up to Sophie's play without notice, and they knew that I wanted them to stay away from her. The fact that they crossed this line made it clear that they weren't going to stop unless I took serious action. Eric was equally furious. He said he felt like they were trying to undermine us as parents and force their way into Sophie's life without our consent. That was the breaking point for me. I realized my parents were never going to respect boundaries or take no for an answer. They had already shown a complete disregard for my feelings and safety, and now they were involving Sophie in their mess. It was time to protect my family in a way I hadn't before. Eric and I decided to consult a lawyer about filing a restraining order. The process was emotionally draining, to say the least. I had to recount everything, from their abandonment after my divorce to their recent behavior, including trying to contact Jake and showing up at Sophie's school play. The lawyer assured us we had a strong case and helped us file the paperwork. When my parents were served, their reaction was predictable. My mom left me a rambling voicemail, crying about how I was tearing the family apart and accusing me of overreacting. My dad, on the other hand, sent an email from a new address since I'd blocked his old one, accusing me of being cold-hearted and saying I was poisoned by Eric's influence. Both of them also. They kept hinting that I was too dumb to know what I was doing and that I was going to regret what I was doing to them. All I could hear was the fact that they still couldn't take accountability for their actions and instead chose to double down on blaming me. They tried to contest the order as well, doing their best to disprove every piece of evidence I had about their treatment of me and my family. Unfortunately for them, I had a mountain of evidence against them, and that wasn't even with me trying to collect proof. They had treated me so badly for years that even the judge saw it and granted the restraining order. The order includes provisions that prevent them from contacting me, Eric, or Sophie in any way, including through third parties. If they violate it, they'll face legal consequences. To make sure we're fully protected, I've taken additional steps. I told everyone in my life, friends and family, that if anyone tries to reach out to me on my parents' behalf, I'll cut them off immediately. Thankfully, no one has tested this boundary so far, and most people have been incredibly supportive. Since the restraining order was put in place, my parents have tried to contact me a few times through indirect means. They sent letters to my old address, which were forwarded to me by my mail service, but I haven't opened them. I'm keeping them as evidence in case I need to prove they're still at it. This whole ordeal has been exhausting, both emotionally and physically. There's a part of me that feels sad about how things turned out. I wish my parents could have changed, but I've come to accept that they are who they are. I can't keep sacrificing my peace and happiness, hoping they'll become better people. Eric and I have decided to focus on moving forward. We're considering taking a family trip with Sophie to get a change of scenery and create some positive memories together. I'm also seeing a therapist to work through the lingering guilt and hurt from everything that's happened with my parents. If I'm being honest, I finally feel like this entire chapter of my life has come to an end. I've done everything I can to protect myself and my family, and I've set boundaries that I intend to enforce. My parents had plenty of chances to rebuild our relationship, and they blew every single one of them. Thank you to everyone who has supported me through this mess. Your advice and encouragement have meant the world to me, and I truly appreciate it.